For most online businesses, December is the best month out of the year for sales. The holiday season brings new buyers, brings increased interest in most online stores. It's also the month that I see most online businesses lose the most amount of money without realizing it. And the reason is something you may have not even noticed. It's not because your ads are broken or your marketing isn't good, and it's not because your product is not something that people want to buy. It's because of something technical. Behind the scenes, in your payment stack, in your checkout flow, your credit card transactions are getting declined at a higher rate than normal, and you're not even noticing. Welcome back to another episode of Click and Convert, where I find things that silently kill your revenue and find solutions for you. And today I'm going to talk about how December is the busiest month of the year, where most online business owners make a lot more revenue than other months, but it's also peak season for fraud, credit card declines, and lost revenue without realizing it. Today, I'm going to explore with you how you can squeeze out and maximize even more your sales for the holiday season. I'm also going to talk to you about the most common reasons I see transactions declined in December and how you can fix it. Lastly, I'm going to explore why banks tighten up their rules in Q4 and what you can do to stop leaking money in your most profitable holiday season sales. One thing many business owners don't understand and don't even realize is that banks work with different algorithms depending on the season, depending on the time of the year. So the reason that we see more declines and more issues with payments in December is because in January, February, and March, there's usually huge spikes of fraud, chargebacks, and disputes. So in Q4, what banks and payment processors usually do is tighten up their rules, tighten up their algorithms to make sure they can minimize the fraud and the losses that happen in Q1 of the following year. And now there's many reasons for this. People usually buy more during the holiday season. There's more impulse purchases. People are just buying faster without really, taking a look at their budget and may overspend and regret it later on. Now, another huge reason that I see credit cards decline is because a lot of consumers buy new devices, during the holiday season, and they're shopping on these new devices. Keep in mind that every device and every consumer has a digital fingerprint. When they start new from a new device, that digital fingerprint is now gone sometimes. And banks, when they don't recognize customers that have been cookied or, purchased from your store before and so forth, they may be more likely to decline. Another huge reason is people are buying things for other people. They're shopping for gifts. So perhaps their address is in one location and the shipping address could be hundreds, if not thousands of miles away. So this poses a lot of risk because that's how a lot of fraud happens, where the billing address doesn't match the shipping address. So there are a lot of things that you can do to fix that, but that's something that you need to keep in mind during the holiday season. Also, another risk factor for credit card declines in December are late night purchases. So a lot of people stay up late, later than usual during the holiday season because they're entertaining or they're out and about and so forth. And a lot of times when transactions happen between midnight and 6 a.m. at the local time of your customer, a bank is more reluctant to go ahead and approve that transaction because there are more disputes that happen when somebody buys late night. They may, just do an impulse purchase and so forth. So banks scrutinize late night transactions a lot more, and late night transactions occur more during the holiday season. And now, as I mentioned earlier, consumers are shopping for new devices. They're also shopping at different merchants and new merchants that they've never purchased before. So when consumers have a specific transaction history with your store, they're more likely to get approved. If they've never been to your store or they've never bought anything from you, and during the holiday season they may have a larger than normal purchase, well, that could also be another reason why the transaction gets declined. Now, the important thing for you to understand, these are all suspicions from the bank. So your job as a merchant is to make sure that you prove to the bank that this is a real transaction, this is a real customer, and the person buying at the other end really wants to buy. Obviously, there are going to be some bad actors. There are going to be some customers who are trying to fraud you and not really buying, but there are a lot of things that you can do as a merchant to appease the bank's fraud algorithms and make sure that you maximize your transactions during the important holiday sales. Now, you have to keep in mind that the bank algorithms are guilty until proven innocent. And what I mean by that is they don't want to prove the transaction until they feel like you have enough information about this customer to make them feel like this is not a fraudulent order. So the more information that you include about the transaction and about your customer, the more likely it is that that transaction will get approved. Now, let me jump into the main decline reasons and what you can do to fix each and every one. I really want to see you guys maximize your profits during this holiday season. Nothing gives me more joy than seeing a business owner, squeeze out 10 or 15% more sales without having to buy more traffic. Now, the number one biggest issue you will see more declines is that the billing address does not match the shipping address. And the further apart these two are, the more likely that that transaction will get declined. So if, for example, you're in the US and you're buying something for somebody in another country, that will cause a lot of issues on the approval side from the bank. So it is important that if you do have some fraud checks that are in place prior to the holiday season, that you now start relaxing some of these fraud checks. You may want to allow, transactions with very different billing and shipping address, or billing and shipping address that are different countries or even thousands of miles away, because a lot of online merchants in regular times don't allow billing and shipping address that are too far apart. In fact, if you're using Stripe's radar system, for example, by default, they may limit you to 100 miles. So if somebody's buying a gift for somebody, and they live in New York and the person lives in Florida, well, that will automatically get declined. So it's important that you verify your fraud settings to allow them to be a little bit more lax during the holiday season, where people are buying gifts and shipping them to their friends that are living very, very far away. Now, other things that you can do to ensure that these transactions get approved is you can run something called 3DS on your checkout page. So if, for example, a customer's billing address and the shipping address are more than 100 miles apart, what you can do is you can have a verification called 3DS, which is sort of like a two-factor authentication, where the customer gets a code on their mobile device that they have to enter in order to prove that that transaction is valid. And this removes a lot of the risk from your payment processor, so they are more likely to approve that transaction. And you can do this directly on your checkout page. I mean, you can add a validation on the checkout page when you're collecting that information in order to tell your payment gateway that I want this transaction to be verified with 3D Secure. And keep in mind, banks love 3D Secure. It removes the fraud risk from that transaction because the customer gets an extra validation. So this is a great way to ensure that that customer is not going to charge back for fraud reasons, and will also give a great validation to the customer's bank and your payment processor that this is a valid transaction. And keep in mind, you don't have to do 3DS on all transactions. You can be selective in situations like this one where the billing and the shipping address don't match. Now, as I said earlier, a lot of fraud tools just block specific billing addresses and shipping address when they're, for example, 100 miles apart or 50 miles apart, I've seen, and so forth. So it is important for you to take a look at those fraud tools and adjust them. And what you might want to do during the holiday season is, instead of decline these transactions, you may want to attribute them a score. So you may want to check various things about the transaction, about the customer, and score it versus just decline based on billing and shipping address. So this is just another way to look at fraud. And for example, things like Stripe Radar, or whether you're using a system like Count, K-O-U-N-T, or your gateway system, will allow you to score a transaction instead of just decline it for one specific setting. And another thing that will be really worth your while is to look at your decline transactions on a daily basis manually. So you could have somebody, for example, in your support department or somebody in your business that takes a look at all the transactions that have been declined to try to validate especially high value orders. A manual review may seem tedious, but if you have high value orders and transactions for large amount, it is very worthwhile to have a human take a look at these transactions and perhaps call the customers, try to validate these transactions and get these orders to be pushed through. I've seen stores that have increased sales by 5 to 10% by doing this manual review, just by calling customers and telling them that the transaction was declined and trying to find another payment method that they can pay with, or, adding more information to the transaction and allowing it to go through. So this is a really important process, even though, a lot of business owners don't want to do manual reviews. During the holiday season, I would press you that this is a very important process. And now what you can do is, while you're doing manual reviews, you could start whitelisting certain customers. If you feel like you have customers that are returning often or buying various gifts for different people in their lives, you can whitelist this customer customer by card number, by IP. So any fraud rules that you have, they would circumvent these and just go straight ahead and be able to purchase from you. So whitelisting customers is something that not a lot of merchants use, but there is a tool in most fraud scoring systems or in your payment gateway that will allow you to whitelist an IP address, a card number, an address, for example, or an email address. So you can allow this customer to buy as often as they want without them tripping up fraud systems. Another quick tip that I find very useful during the holiday season is you can have shipping notes, or you can ask your customers if this is a gift. This will be a very good indication for you. For example, if the shipping and the billing address don't match, if somebody clicks that this is a gift, well, then it makes a little bit more sense. So if you are doing that manual review, you can just focus on those that say gift, for example, that have been declined. So you can contact these customers sooner and make sure that you're able to fulfill their order. And the most important thing here is you are collecting information. The more information that you're collecting on your checkout page, the easier it will be for you to validate these transactions and try to push them through and obviously maximize your sales during the holiday season. Another thing that I see often is issuing banks declining for fraud reasons. Now, as I said earlier, banks and especially customers' banks are a little bit more reluctant in approving transactions in December because there is a lot of fraud that happens during the holiday season. Now, some of the reasons that they block transactions for potentially fraud reasons is if the customer has never purchased from you, for example, in the past, that could be a big indicator for the bank to decline that transaction. If they see a very high value order, so customers have different buying patterns on their cards. So if they're usually buying things that are under $500 and then all of a sudden they have a large purchase, that could trigger an algorithm to block that transaction because it's outside of the customer's buying pattern. As I said earlier, cross-border payments, if you're in the US, you're shipping something to somebody in Europe or vice versa, or even if it's within the US, but a far distance. For example, your customer's in New York and they're shipping something to somebody in Florida, that is a very big distance there. And usually the cutoff point is about 100 miles. So banks see what the billing address and then they look at the shipping address. And if that difference is over 100 miles, they're a little bit more reluctant to approve that transaction. Another thing that triggers fraud declines is multiple attempts. So now some customers come to your store and they really want to buy. They just want to buy whatever product or service you're selling, or they're trying to buy a gift for somebody that they think your product is perfect for, and they get declined. So they just keep pressing pay now, pay now, pay now, and then transactions just keep getting sent to the bank. So that is a fraud trigger for most banks because they think that that card is stolen and somebody's just, desperately trying to use it. So it is important for you to not allow a customer to use the exact same card, the card number, expiry date, and billing address multiple times in your payment gateway. You can block that either at the checkout page level or you can block it in your payment gateway so it doesn't actually go to the customer's bank so many times, as that can trigger fraud alerts. Now, what you can do in these situations is turn on smart retries. So as I've said multiple times on my channel, if you've been listening for a while, or even if you're new here, having multiple payment solutions will really serve you well. You don't want to have one point of failure. For example, if you're using Stripe, that's great. And if it's working well for you, that's amazing. But you want to have at least one other payment provider. So for example, if Stripe declines a transaction, you can take that transaction and try it at another payment processor to see if you'll have better luck. Oftentimes you could have success at one versus the other. So it is worth a try. And the important thing to understand is that not all transactions should be retried. For example, if a transaction is declined due to insufficient funds, there is no point in you taking it from one processor to another. It's the processor is telling you that that customer has no money. So there is nothing that's going to change from going from one to the other. But if you get an issuing bank decline, for example, or something called do not honor, or something as code 05, then it may be worth your while taking it from one processor to another just to attempt that transaction. And you don't want to attempt it multiple times. If you tried it one place and you get a decline, and then you try it somewhere else and you get a decline, that's where you want to end it. But you could see recovery of 2, 3, even 5% by trying it at another payment processor. Another thing that you can do is offer a digital wallet. A digital wallet goes through a different payment processor and a different checkout flow. So you can then try Google Pay or Apple Pay Pay, and they have different biometrics that they verify for the customer, so they may feel more confident in approving that transaction. So if somebody declines with their credit card, have a pop-up ready saying, hey, do you want to try Google Pay or Apple Pay or PayPal? And you will recover a lot of sales using these payment methods. And again, what you can do is if you're retrying that transaction, you could decide to retry the transaction with 3D Secure. As I said earlier, it's like a 2FA for credit card transactions. So sometimes if a bank declines a transaction, but then gets that transaction back with a 3D Secure validation, they may approve it because it does mean that the customer has the device next to them and they're validating that transaction with the code that's sent to their mobile device. So they feel more confident about transactions that are validated with 3D Secure. Another decline reason I see increase in December is insufficient funds. Now, a lot of business owners think that there is nothing they can do about this, but there definitely is. You could offer, for example, buy now, pay later options. You could offer your customers to pay in installments, and you can also offer a digital wallet, for example, like PayPal. And you can offer a digital wallet, for example, like PayPal or Apple Pay or Google Pay, as they may have different cards stored for those payment methods. You could also offer alternatives like ACH and direct debits. So don't just take an insufficient fund, offer your clients other ways to pay and see if they're willing to take them. So just because a customer doesn't have credit on one credit card doesn't mean that they don't have money in other payment methods. You have to keep in mind, during the holiday season, Black Friday shopping period, Boxing Day, and so forth, a lot of people just buy a lot of things and don't necessarily budget for them. So you will see, as a merchant, more insufficient fund declines in December than you'll see in any other month. Another thing that we see often in December is data entry errors, CVV decline. So customers are rushing through your checkout process. They may be rushing to buy Christmas presents to make sure that they arrive in time and so forth. So they're just typing out things very, very quickly. So you'll see CVV error or invalid card number and so forth. These usually are just typo errors. These are things that, if you just tell your customer, please verify the card number, this is invalid, and try again, or we got a CVV error, please check your CVV and type it out again, you may be able to recoup that sale. So just a little data validation there is very helpful because customers sometimes don't realize that they've typed out the wrong number. So just letting them know that that is an invalid card number or that is an invalid CVV will help tremendously in them taking a look at their information and correcting it and just resubmitting. And the important thing here is to highlight errors immediately. As soon as you see a credit card number that it's invalid, you just tell the customer immediately that card is invalid. There's something called the LUNH algorithm. So that's LUNH algorithm. You can implement that directly on your checkout page. So as your customer is typing out their card number, if the card number doesn't fall within the LUNH algorithm, it means that that's not a valid card number. So all credit card numbers use the LUNH algorithm to validate whether it's a real card number or not. So you can do that directly on your checkout page and avoid sending a transaction with an invalid card number to your processor and telling your customer right away, hey, check that card number. That card number doesn't exist. And also, one thing to keep in mind on your checkout page is know your demographic. If you have older buyers or people who might have some vision issues and so forth, make the fields larger, have the font be larger as well. So these are just small things that you can do on checkout to make sure that your customers are not getting confused and not making any typos, which is preventing them from buying from you. And now during the holiday season, we see huge spikes in customers buying globally. So, you might be a US store owner and you're starting to get transactions from Europe or vice versa. You can see a lot of international commerce happening during the holiday season as people are sending gifts to each other, are buying various things because they're on sale and so forth. So this is prime season for banks to be on alert. They're worried if they allow too many international transactions, that opens up the floodgates to fraud. And there is a high correlation of international transactions with increased fraud rates. So it is important for the banks to do these verifications, but obviously during the holiday season, these types of transactions happen more often. So as a store owner, you need to be more vigilant and understand what you need to do to approve the right transactions. A couple of things that banks really hate to see on transactions is when the IP comes from a known VPN. Obviously, fraudsters use VPNs more frequently to buy things, so banks are a little bit on more high alert when they see VPNs, although there are many consumers that use VPNs on a daily basis. You can even, if you have an iPhone, you can turn it on and turn it off very, very quickly. So, it is important that you have some other data validations to make sure that your customer's bank knows that this is a valid transaction, even if it's coming from a VPN. And to that respect, as I mentioned earlier, banks do not like foreign IPs. So if you have a US business with a US merchant account and all of a sudden, people from outside of the US are buying from you, you obviously want to allow them to buy from you. You want any customer, but if it's from a foreign IP, you may want to have extra validations and provide more information about the transaction and think about doing 3DS for non-domestic transactions. Another thing to consider when you're talking about foreign buyers is currency mismatches. So if your customer, for example, is in the UK and you have a store in the US and you accept US dollars, just by having a currency mismatch, you risk losing that transaction. So most payment processors, including my company Direct PayNet, if you have a merchant account with us, or if, for example, you're using Stripe or PayPal or anybody out there, they offer something called dynamic currency conversion. So what that means is if you have a British buyer that's coming to your store in the US, what's going to happen is that it will convert the currency automatically to match your customer's currency. So your customer's bank will see that the transaction is happening in the local currency and you will receive the equivalent in US dollars. So it's a win-win for everybody. The customer will not have to pay foreign transaction fees because they're being charged in their local currency, and you will get the exact same amount in US dollars or your local currency. So turning on dynamic currency conversion, especially during the holidays, is very, very important. Talk to your processor, make sure that it's working well, test it out, use a VPN to see how it shows up for your customers. But not having this on will pretty much close up your international sales. Now, one little thing to mention about international buyers is that you can have a different set of fraud rules for your domestic buyers versus your international buyers. And keep in mind that fraud rules are meant to be changed. So you may have a different set of fraud rules set up in December, and that could be different than what you see in January. So take a look at these fraud rules. If you're working with a provider like Stripe, as I said, they have Stripe Radar, and these rules are meant to be updated. It's meant to be looked at on a regular basis to make sure that they work for your online store. If you have a payment gateway, make sure that you turn on the fraud rules and make sure that they validate your business model and they work for your business. Another thing that I see quite often in December is duplicate transaction declines. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind is that if a customer comes to your store and buys something for $20 and pays with one specific card and then tries to click again or tries to buy again within 20 minutes, most banks will decline that second transaction. They do not want duplicate transactions because that could be a sign of fraud. That could be a sign of a customer error. So you have to keep in mind, in order for it to qualify as a duplicate transaction, it has to be the same card number for the exact same amount. So now customers may be buying, for example, multiple gifts for different people in various locations. So they may, want to buy one product 5 times, but ship it to 5 different people. And that product costs the same. So they may just be, clicking to buy now 5 different times. Odds are, if they're doing this within a 20-minute window, that second transaction is getting declined. So a couple of solutions here are, first of all, advising your customers that they cannot buy the exact same thing or there's a duplicate transaction, making sure that the customer cannot click buy now as the transaction is being processed. So either have, a status bar or gray out that buy now button. Sometimes customers get impatient. They click it once, it's not fast enough for them. They click it again, and that sends a duplicate transaction flag and a decline. And another thing that you can do is you can ask your customers, for example, to combine the order into one cart, pay one transaction amount, and then offer them various fields, for example, to add more shipping addresses. So that will avoid the duplicate transaction error there. And as I said earlier, you want to give your customers some clear feedback if there's a problem, if you're seeing a duplicate transaction. And you may want to also offer them, when you're offering them that feedback, a phone number that they can call you, for example, to clear up what's happening or what they're trying to buy, or, if they want to buy multiple things, but shipping to different addresses, you may want to ask them to call you and process that order manually. So the important thing to understand is communicate with your customers. Have smart and intelligent decline messages explaining to your customer what they need to do in order to purchase from you successfully. The more you tell your customers, the more information you relate to them, the odds of them fixing it increase, and the odds of you making more sales also increase. Now, what are you going to do if a transaction fails? So obviously I've listed out a couple of things that you can do for every specific decline message, but ultimately, if you're not able to implement these fast enough, the most important thing for you to understand is if a transaction fails, don't send that customer away. Give them, for example, a 1-800 number they can call so they can reach out to you and explain the situation, and maybe you can have a human process that transaction so they can get their order. Or you can also offer them alternative payment methods. As I mentioned, wallets are super popular. They go through a different payment and checkout flow. So even if a credit card gets declined on your checkout page, it doesn't mean that it'll get declined through Apple Pay or Google Pay or PayPal. So offer them an alternative payment mode. I guarantee you that will recover at least 5% of your decline transactions. It will add a lot more sales to you by showing that you're flexible with your customers, by meeting them where they're at. And most importantly, this is not a time where you want to send customers to your competitors. This is a time where you want to bring your customers closer to you, because if they have a good buying experience with you during the holidays, the odds of them becoming customers in the new year increase substantially. Now, one thing to keep in mind is all the advice I'm giving you may seem like I'm telling you to be more lax on your fraud rules and to let more in and so forth. That is not further from the truth. I am just trying to educate you on options that you have to ensure that buyers who legitimately want to buy from you are able to buy from you. Keep in mind that December sales often lead to January chargebacks. So do this intelligently, go through your fraud settings, and don't just turn everything off and let it, be open season buying from you from your store. So you want to make sure that the rules that you set up make sense for the whole year, and then modify them during the holiday season to allow for different buying patterns during the holiday season. If you ignore this and you just kind of let everything go through, you will see a huge increase in January chargebacks, disputes, refunds. So all the profit that you may be adding in December and the holiday season will quickly be overtaken with losses in January. So make sure that you take a look at your fraud settings, make sure that they make sense, make sure that you add, for example, validations like 3DS or phone verifications from your call center agents. This is the time to take out all the tools that you have at your disposal to increase your sales, to get more customers in December that will likely serve you in the new year if they're happy with their buying experience. And if you don't pay attention at this time, you may risk, having issues with your payment processor, like reserves if they see higher chargebacks, account shutdowns, fines. These are all consequences that happen in the new year. You have a great holiday season and then you return to work in January only to realize, you have these huge losses, or you have emails from your payment processors putting holds or reserves on your account. So take the correct measures and make sure that you allow good sales to go through. And if you need any help auditing this process or figuring out the best tools for your online business, feel free to contact me. My information is down below. I'd be happy to help you. And if you found this episode helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing content. Thank you so much for listening, and have yourself a great day.